The humid air of the University of Lagos didn't just carry the scent of salt from the lagoon. It carried the stench of a ruined reputation. Tobi Adeyemi was the golden boy of the engineering faculty until the night Fiona, a girl whose obsession he had politely declined for months, walked out of his hostel room with torn clothes and a hollow scream. In a society that often judges before it listens, Tobi became a ghost in his own life. This isn't just a story of a false accusation. It is a descent into a meticulously planned web of envy and female rivalry. You will see Tobi lose everything, only to realize that his salvation wasn't found in a courtroom, but in the dark secrets of the very girl who sought to destroy him. By the end, the truth won't just set him free. It will leave a trail of broken lives that no apology can fix. The fluorescent lights in the Faculty of Engineering library flickered, casting long with mixed shadows across Tobi's sketches. At 22, Tobi possessed the kind of effortless grace that made people look twice, a mixture of academic brilliance and a quiet, observant nature. He was focused on his final year project, a bridge design that symbolized everything he wanted for his future: stability, strength, and a way forward. He didn't hear the soft click of heels approaching his cubicle until a shadow fell over his drafting paper. "You are still here, Tobi. You work too hard," Fiona said, her voice dropping into that syrupy register she reserved only for him. She leaned against the desk, her fingers tracing the edge of his ruler. Fiona was beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, the kind of girl who was used to getting what she wanted by merit of her father's influence and her own undeniable charm. But Tobi had always seen the flicker of something unsettled in her eyes. "Deadlines don't care about sleep, Fiona," Tobi replied without looking up. He was polite always, but he maintained a distance that felt like a brick wall to someone like her. He knew she liked him. The entire department knew. She had sent him food, offered him rides in her Lexus, and even tried to study with him in private. Each time, he had declined with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't interested in her drama or the trail of broken hearts she left behind. Fiona's smile tightened. Rejection was a language she didn't speak fluently. "There's a party at the new hall tonight. You should come. Everyone is asking for the department's brightest star." She reached out, her hand grazing his shoulder, her thumb lingering a second too long on his neck. Tobi gently pulled away, finally meeting her gaze. The coldness in his expression was the final spark to a fuse he didn't even know was lit. "I can't, Fiona. I have to finish this," he said firmly. He watched her face shift, a momentary lapse where the sweetness curdled into something bitter and jagged. She didn't argue, she simply nodded, gathered her designer handbag, and walked away. As she reached the door, she turned back, a strange, haunting smile playing on her lips. "Be careful, Tobi. Sometimes the things we build are easier to tear down than we think." He dismissed it as melodrama. He didn't know that within 6 hours, his name would be shouted in corridors not in praise, but in absolute disgust. He didn't know that the girl he just dismissed was already mentally tearing his bridge to pieces. The midnight air was thick with the scent of rain and cheap diesel from the generators humming behind the hostels. Tobi had finally packed his bags, his eyes stinging from hours of technical drawing. He walked toward his room in Jaja Hall, the shadows of the large neem trees dancing on the pavement like skeletal fingers. He felt a strange sense of unease, a prickling at the back of his neck that he couldn't quite shake off. As he reached his door, he found it slightly ajar. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was sure he had locked it. Pushing it open, he gasped. Fiona was sitting on his bed, her hair disheveled and her eyes vacant, staring at a small photo of Tobi's mother on the bedside table. "Fiona, how did you get in here? You need to leave right now," Tobi said, his voice dropping into a low, cautious tone. He didn't step further into the room. He stayed by the door, his hand gripping the cold metal handle. Fiona didn't move at first. Then she stood up slowly, her silk blouse unbuttoned at the top, her movements fluid and haunting. She walked toward him, the smell of expensive perfume and gin hitting him like a physical blow. She wasn't just drunk, she was vibrating with a manic energy that made the air in the small room feel pressurized, almost explosive. "Why am I never enough for you, Tobi?" she whispered, her face inches from his. "I have everything. I could give you everything. My father could get you a job in the UK before you even graduate. But you look at me like I'm a bug under a microscope." Tobi reached out to guide her toward the door, his touch clinical and brief. "Fiona, you are not yourself. Let me call your friends to pick you up. This is inappropriate and dangerous for both of us." He turned to grab his phone from the desk, a split second where his back was turned to her, a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In that heartbeat of silence, the sound of tearing fabric ripped through the room. Tobi spun around to see Fiona clutching her own collar, pulling the fabric until the buttons flew across the floor like tiny white teeth. She grabbed a gas cup from his table and smashed it against the wall, the shards spraying across the floor. Before he could speak, she began to scream, a high, piercing sound that cut through the quiet of the hostel corridor. "No, Tobi, please stop," she wailed, her voice carrying an Oscar-worthy conviction. Tobi stood frozen, his hands raised in a gesture of innocence that looked like guilt in the dim light. Doors began to fly open in the hallway. The heavy thud of running feet approached. Tobi looked at Fiona, who was now huddled in the corner, her face a mask of practiced terror. She looked at him through her tangled hair and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. It was the most chilling thing he had ever seen. When the first group of students burst through the door, led by the hostel chairman, they saw a scene of absolute chaos. A shattered room, a weeping, half-clothed girl, and the golden boy standing over her with a look of stunned silence. The trap had snapped shut, and the teeth were sinking deep into his skin. The morning sun over the University of Lagos usually brought a sense of renewal, but for Tobi, it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. By 8 a.m., the video recorded by a student's cracked Infinix phone had bypassed the campus gate and flooded the Unilag Confessions Twitter threads. It was a shaky, blurry 10-second clip of Tobi standing over a sobbing Fiona, his hands raised, his room a wreckage of glass and torn fabric. To the digital jury, it wasn't a cry for help, it was a snapshot of a predator caught in the act. The comments were a jagged glass floor of, "I always knew he was too perfect," and "castrate him." Tobi sat in the cold wooden chair of the Dean of Student Affairs office. The air conditioner hummed with a mocking consistency. Opposite him sat Dinokoro, a man who had once shaken Tobi's hand at the prize-giving ceremony, now looking at him as if he were a stain on the faculty's pristine white walls. "Tobi, the evidence is visceral," the dean said, his voice heavy with disappointed weight. "Fiona is in the University Medical Center. Her father is a senior advocate of Nigeria. He is not asking for an investigation, he is asking for your head on a platter. Do you have anything to say that isn't a stutter?" Tobi's voice was a ghost of its former self. "I didn't touch her, sir. She broke the glass herself. She tore her own clothes. She's been following me for months and I told her no." The words felt thin, even to his own ears. In the face of a weeping girl with bruises she had likely inflicted on herself in the dark, his logic sounded like the desperate ramblings of a guilty man. The dean sighed, a sound like shifting gravel. "Until the disciplinary committee meets, you are suspended from all academic activities. You are to vacate the hostel by noon. For your own safety, Tobi, the boys in Jaja are restless."
Walking out of the Senate building was a gauntlet of whispers. People he had tutored in fluid mechanics turned their heads as he passed. His best friend, Segun, was waiting by the lagoon front, but he didn't offer a fist bump. He stood 5 feet away, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "Tobi, tell me the truth. Just between us. Did you lose control? Was it distress?" Segun's voice wasn't filled with support. It was filled with a voyeuristic hunger for a confession. The betrayal stung more than the dean's coldness. Even those who knew his character were buckling under the weight of the scandal's gravity. Fiona, meanwhile, was playing her part to perfection. From her hospital bed, surrounded by flowers and get-well cards from student politicians, she watched the numbers on her social media grow. She wasn't just a victim, she was a martyr for every girl who had ever been ignored by a golden boy. She looked at the photo of Tobi on her screen, his face captioned with the word rapist in bold red letters. She felt a surge of power more intoxicating than any gin. If she couldn't have his love, she would have his ruin. She would own the very memory of him. The yellow Danfo bus hissed to a stop at the gate of Tobi's family compound in Ikorodu. As he stepped out, the dust from the unpaved road clung to his skin, a physical manifestation of the grime he felt inside. He didn't have his engineering books or his dignity. He only had a single duffel bag and the heavy silence of a man whose world had ended in a single night. His mother, Maami, was standing by the veranda, her wrapper tied tight around her waist. She didn't move to hug him. Her eyes, usually bright with pride for her scholar son, were clouded with a confusion that hurt more than any physical blow. "Tobi, they are calling your name on the radio in the market," she said, her voice trembling. "They are saying you did something abominable to a daughter of a big man. Tell me they are lying." Tobi looked at the ground, the red Lagos earth blurring as his eyes welled up. "I didn't do it, Mami. She's lying because I didn't want her." His mother didn't answer immediately. She looked at his bruised knuckles, a result of him punching his wardrobe in frustration the night before, and sighed, a sound that felt like a funeral dirge. In a neighborhood where reputation was the only currency, Tobi was suddenly bankrupt.
The news had traveled faster than he had. Within hours of his arrival, the local church elders had visited, not to offer prayers, but to advise his mother that Tobi should stay indoors to avoid bringing shame to the congregation. His younger sister, Bisola, wouldn't even look at him. She was a student at a nearby secondary school, and the taunts from her classmates had already started. "Your brother is a beast," they told her. Tobi spent his days in the dim light of his room, watching the ceiling fan spin, wondering how a life built on years of hard work could be dismantled by a few well-placed screams and a torn blouse. Late one evening, a notification chirped on his phone, a device he had almost thrown into the lagoon. It was a message from an unknown number. Fiona doesn't just destroy people because she's angry. She destroys them because she's bored and practiced. Look into what happened to Cynthia at her old secondary school in Abuja. Tobi sat up, his heart racing. Who was this? He replied instantly, but the number was already deactivated. A flicker of hope, dangerous and sharp, ignited in his chest. He wasn't just fighting a lie anymore. He was hunting a pattern. Meanwhile, back in the city, Fiona was basking in the glow of her newfound status. She had become the face of a local Justice for Her campaign, her social media following ballooning as she posted cryptic quotes about healing and strength. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were off, she looked at Tobi's empty seat in the lecture hall and felt a strange void. It wasn't guilt. Fiona didn't possess the hardware for that. It was the realization that the hunt was over, and she needed a new way to keep the adrenaline high. She didn't know that Tobi, the boy she thought she had buried, was starting to dig his way out. The lead from the anonymous message felt like a frayed rope in his storm, but Tobi clung to it. He spent his nights in the corner of a local cyber cafe in Ikorodu, the fluorescent light humming a low, anxious tune. He dug through old-school yearbooks digitized on Facebook and obscure blogs from 2018. Then he saw it, a grainy photo of a girl named Cynthia, a bright-eyed prefect at an elite Abuja secondary school, flanked by a younger, sharper-featured Fiona. The caption mentioned a tragic withdrawal following a scandal. Tobi's heart thundered against his ribs. He managed to track down a cousin of Cynthia's through LinkedIn, sending a message that was half prayer, half plea. 2 days later, his phone buzzed. It was a voice note from a number with a +44 country code. The voice was hollow, stripped of its youth. "If you're asking about Fiona, you're already dead to the world, aren't you?" Cynthia said. She explained how Fiona had been her best friend until Cynthia started dating the boy Fiona wanted. Within a week, Fiona had accused Cynthia of orchestrating a physical assault on her. There were no cameras, only Fiona's tears and a shredded uniform. Cynthia's family had been forced to move to London to escape the shame. She doesn't just want you to be, she wants to be the reason you cease to exist. Tobi felt a cold shiver. This wasn't just a crush gone wrong, it was a serial pattern of psychological warfare. He realized that Fiona's power didn't come from her father's money alone, but from her ability to weaponize empathy. She was a master of the perfect victim narrative. But Cynthia had something Tobi didn't. A diary she had kept during that time, filled with screenshots of messages Fiona had sent before the accusation. Messages that showed a calculating, cold-blooded obsession. "I'll send you the scans," Cynthia whispered. "Not for you, but because I'm tired of her winning." While Tobi waited for the emails, the situation in Lagos intensified. A group of student activists had organized a walk for Fiona on campus, and the university senate was under immense pressure to expel Tobi permanently. His name was being dragged through the mud in national dailies. His father, a retired teacher who had been silent since Tobi's return, finally spoke. "Tobi, if you are innocent, don't just sit here and rot. A man who is being chased by a masquerade does not stop to count the stripes on its cloth. Move." Tobi didn't just move, he strategized. He knew that showing the diary to the police wouldn't be enough. Fiona's father would bury it. He needed something more scandalous, something that would hit Fiona where she lived, her social standing. He began to draft a plan that involved the one thing Fiona couldn't control, her own vanity. He sent a message back to the anonymous number that had first tipped him off. "I know who you are. You are not a stranger. You're someone close to her. Help me and we both get our lives back." The reply came an hour later. "Meet me at the back of the Faculty of Arts, Friday, 2 a.m. The familiar scent of the University of Lagos Lagoon, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a shroud. Tobi moved through the shadows of the Faculty of Arts, his hoodie pulled low, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was a trespasser on his own campus, a ghost haunted by a reputation he hadn't earned. The 2 a.m. silence was punctuated only by the distant hum of a security patrol's motorbike. He reached the designated spot behind the amphitheater, where the bougainvillea vines hung thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and forgotten secrets. "You're late," a voice whispered from the darkness. A figure stepped into a sliver of moonlight. It was Nneka, Fiona's supposed best friend, and the girl who had been leading the social media charge against him. Tobi recoiled, his fists clenching. "You? You are the one who messaged me. You've been the one posting the most vitriol online." Nneka's face was a mask of calculated exhaustion. She held up a hand, her manicured nails glinting. "I had to. If Fiona even suspects I'm not on her side, she would turn on me next. You think you are her first victim. You are just the first one she couldn't break with a smile." Nneka leaned against a concrete pillar, her voice drooping to a low, jagged hiss.
She's been obsessed with you since the first year, Tobi. When you ignored her at the engineering ball, she didn't just get angry, she got busy. She has a folder on her laptop, the Tobi files. It's not just photos, it's a diary of every time you looked at another girl, every time you walked past her without nodding. She didn't just frame you that night, she rehearsed it. She practiced the screaming in front of her vanity mirror for 3 days. Tobi felt a wave of nausea. Why tell me this now? What do you want, Nneka? She looked away, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of guilt and self-preservation. Because she started looking at my boyfriend, Chuka, the same way she looked at you. She's bored with your destruction already. She needs a new high. I won't let her do to him what she did to you. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver voice recorder. I caught her yesterday. She was laughing about how easy it was, how the golden boy was nothing but a lead weight now. Tobi reached for the recorder, but Nneka pulled it back. Not yet. This isn't enough to clear you in the eyes of the law, not with her father's influence. You need her to admit it when she thinks she's won. You need to provoke the pride, Tobi. She doesn't fear the truth, she only fears being irrelevant. She handed him a small slip of paper with a room number at a boutique hotel in Lekki. She's celebrating her recovery there tomorrow night, alone. She thinks you are in Ikorodu, rotting. Go to her. Make her think you've crawled back to beg. It's the only way.
The Azure Boutique Hotel in Lekki was a fortress of glass and white marble, a place where the wealthy came to hide their sins behind designer curtains. Tobi stood in the lobby, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had traded his worn hoodie for a crisp black shirt Nneka had provided, a costume for the performance of his life. He wasn't the broken boy from Ikorodu anymore. He was a man walking into a trap he had helped set. As the elevator hummed toward the penthouse suite, he checked the small, high-sensitivity microphone taped to his chest, hidden beneath the fabric. When the doors slid open, the air smelled of lilies and expensive champagne. Fiona was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of sparkling wine in her hand. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair cascading down her back in perfect waves. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a conqueror surveying her kingdom. When she turned and saw him, her eyes didn't fill with fear. They filled with a dark, triumphant glow. "Tobi," she breathed, her voice a purr of satisfaction. "I knew you'd come. I knew you couldn't stay away from the only person who still has power over your name." Tobi took a step into the room, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You won, Fiona," he said, his voice cracking with a practiced desperation. "My father won't look at me. My sister is being bullied. The university is going to expel me tomorrow. I have nowhere else to go." He sank into a plush velvet chair, burying his face in his hands. He could feel her moving toward him, the soft whisper of her robe against the carpet. She stood over him, her hand resting on his head like a queen blessing a peasant. "It didn't have to be this way, you know," she whispered, her fingers tangling in his hair. "I offered you the world and you gave me silence. I had to show you that my silence is much louder than yours." Tobi looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, a trick of the light and sheer adrenaline. Was it worth it to ruin a man's life just because he didn't love you the way you wanted? Fiona laughed, a sharp musical sound that sent a chill down his spine. She took a slow sip of her drink, leaning back against the mahogany desk. "Love? Tobi, don't be so middle class," she sneered, her mask finally slipping to reveal the jagged ego beneath. "It was about the challenge. You were the only thing in that faculty I couldn't buy or break. So I decided to see if I could make the world believe you were a monster. And look at them. They ate it up. They didn't even ask for proof. One tear from me was worth more than 4 years of your Dean's List certificates. She leaned in closer, her breath smelling of strawberries and malice. I broke the glass, Tobi. I tore the silk, and I'll do it again just to watch you crawl like this.
The silence in the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the Lekki-Ikoyi link bridge traffic. Tobi remained seated, his head bowed, but his heart had transitioned from a frantic drum to a steady, cold rhythm. He looked at Fiona, who was swirling her champagne, her face radiant with the intoxication of her own perceived brilliance. She looked down at him not with love, but with the pride of a sculptor who had successfully carved a masterpiece out of someone else's misery. She was beautiful, and in this moment, she was utterly terrifying. "You really did it all yourself," Tobi said, his voice a low whisper that pulled her closer. "The bruises on your arms, the way you screamed just as the hostel chairman reached the door, it was perfect timing, Fiona. Even I almost believed I had done it." He looked up at her, letting a flicker of a smile touch his lips, a smile that didn't match the devastation he had worn minutes before. Fiona tilted her head, confused by the sudden shift in his energy. She leaned against the mahogany desk, her silk robe fluttering.
"It was art, Tobi," she boasted, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial purr. "The world wants a victim and a villain. I just gave them the casting they craved. My father's lawyers will ensure the school expels you by Friday. By Saturday, you'll be a cautionary tale in every hostel in Nigeria. And me? I'll be the brave survivor who moved on to find someone better." She reached out to stroke his cheek, her touch cold. "I didn't just break you, Tobi. I erased you. Everything you worked for belongs to the lie I created." Tobi stood up slowly, the slumped posture vanishing. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the small, blinking silver device Nneka had given him. Fiona's eyes widened, the champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble floor, a poetic echo of the glass she had broken in his room. The liquid seeped into the rug like a blood stain. "You are not the only one who knows how to stage a scene, Fiona," Tobi said, his voice now resonant and clear. "Nneka isn't as loyal as you think. She's tired of being your shadow, and I'm tired of being your footstool." Fiona lunged for the recorder, her face contorting into a mask of feline rage, but Tobi stepped back, his height giving him the advantage. "It's already broadcasting, Fiona, not to the police and not to the dean. It's going straight to your father's private iPad and the group chat of the board of trustees." Nneka set up the link. Fiona froze, her breath coming in jagged gasps. The power she had wielded like a whip was suddenly a noose around her own neck. The scandalous truth wasn't just out, it was vibrating in the pocket of the very people who protected her. The penthouse of the Azure Boutique Hotel, once a sanctuary of Fiona's arrogance, now felt like a glass cage. The silence that followed Tobi's revelation was broken by the sharp, rhythmic ping of Fiona's phone. Then another and another. The notifications were a digital avalanche. Messages from her father's inner circle, from Nneka, and from the very board of trustees members who had been prepared to sign Tobi's expulsion papers. Fiona's face, usually a masterpiece of composure, began to fray at the edges. The ivory pallor of her skin turned a mottled, sickly grey as she realized the recording hadn't just reached the authorities, it had reached the people whose opinion she valued more than the law. "You think this changes anything?" Fiona hissed, though her voice lacked its previous razor edge. She lunged for her phone, her fingers trembling as she swiped through the messages. Her father's text was at the top, devoid of his usual indulgent tone. Do not come home tonight. The driver is dismissed. We will speak with the lawyers in the morning. The weight of those words hit her harder than any physical blow. In the world Fiona inhabited, being a victim was a currency, but being a clumsy liar was a social death sentence. Her father wasn't angry about the morality, he was humiliated by the exposure. Tobi watched her, but he didn't feel the rush of triumph he had expected. Instead, he felt a cold, hollow clarity. He had spent weeks being the monster in everyone's story, and now, watching Fiona unravel, he saw how easy it was to switch roles. "It changes everything, Fiona," Tobi said, his voice devoid of pity. The golden boy didn't break, but the perfect victim just cracked wide open. He walked toward the door, his movements steady. He had achieved his goal. The truth was undeniable. But the cost of this war was etched in the dark circles under his eyes and the bridge he had failed to finish. As he reached the heavy oak door, Fiona let out a guttural scream, hurling her empty champagne flute at him. It shattered against the wood, a pathetic imitation of the chaos she had orchestrated in Jaja Hall. "I will ruin you, Tobi. I will find another way. You are nothing without the reputation I gave you," she shrieked, her silk robe catching on the corner of the mahogany desk, tearing with a sharp, final sound. Tobi didn't turn back. He stepped out into the carpeted hallway, the cool air of the corridor hitting him like a reprieve. He was no longer a fugitive. He was a ghost returning to the land of the living. Outside the hotel, the Lekki night was vibrant, indifferent to the destruction upstairs. Tobi stood on the pavement, breathing in the salty air from the nearby Atlantic. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had his life back, but it was a life stripped of its innocence. He checked his phone. Ineka had sent a final message. "It's done. The recording is everywhere that matters. But remember, Tobi, when you play with fire to catch a pyromaniac, you still end up with soot on your skin." He deleted the thread. The next chapter wasn't about justice. It was about the aftermath. The walk through the University of Lagos gates the following Monday felt different. The "Work for Fiona" posters were still taped to the concrete pillars, but they were now peeling, dampened by the morning dew and defaced with scrawled insults. As Tobi stepped onto the main walkway, the silence followed him. Not the sharp, accusatory silence of the previous week, but a heavy, awkward quiet. People who had looked away when he passed now stared with wide, guilty eyes. The news of the recording had spread through the campus WhatsApp groups like a wildfire in a dry savanna. He reached the engineering faculty, and the change was immediate. Segun, the friend who had doubted him, was waiting by the stairs. "Tobi, guy, I always knew. I mean, we were all just confused by the drama, you know. The baby's a psycho." Segun reached out for a fist bump, his face molded into a mask of easy camaraderie. Tobi looked at the extended hand, then up at Segun's eyes. He didn't see a friend. He saw a mirror of the world's fickleness. He walked past without a word, leaving Segun's hand hanging in the humid air. In the dean's office, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of old paper and new regret. Dinokoro didn't look to be in the eye. He was busy signing a document, a formal retraction of the suspension. The university deeply regrets the accelerated nature of the disciplinary process, Mr. Adeyemi, the dean muttered, pushing the paper across the desk. "Fiona has been withdrawn by her family. There will be no further enquiry. You are free to resume your project." There was no apology for the trauma, only a desire to bury the scandal before it stained the institution's ranking. Tobi picked up the paper, but he didn't feel relieved. He felt a cold, simmering resentment. He had been a golden boy, then a monster, and now he was a victim. None of these labels were who he actually was. He realized that the people cheering for his justice were the same ones who would have cheered for his expulsion a week ago. They didn't care about the truth, they cared about the spectacle. The betrayal of his peers stung more than Fiona's lies because it was collective. It was the realization that in Nigeria, and perhaps everywhere, you are only as good as your latest headline. He went to the library to find his bridge sketches. They were exactly where he had left them, but someone had spilled coffee on the corner of the blueprints. As he tried to wipe the stain away, he realized he didn't want to build bridges anymore. At least, not for people who would let him fall off them at the first sign of a storm. He sat in his usual cubicle, but the walls felt too close. He checked his phone and saw a message from an unknown number. "I'm not done with you." It wasn't from Fiona. The style was different. It was the same anonymous source that had helped him. The game, it seemed, was shifting. The sun was setting behind the Lagos lagoon, painting the water in shades of bruised purple and orange. Tobi sat on the concrete embankment, the mysterious message glowing on his screen like a digital ember. He had assumed Nneka was the anonymous whistleblower, but the tone of this new text was different, sharper, more clinical. As he stared at the words, a shadow elongated beside his own. He didn't turn around. He knew the scent of the perfume. It was vanilla and spice, but it didn't belong to Fiona. "You look like a man who just realized that winning a war doesn't mean you've survived it," a voice said. Tobi looked up to see Bisola, his younger sister. But this wasn't the crying girl from Ikorodu who couldn't look him in the eye. She was dressed in a sleek blazer, her expression devoid of the familiar warmth they had shared for 20 years. She sat down beside him, tossing a stone into the dark water. "You were always the favorite, Tobi. The golden boy. The one who was going to lift the family out of the dust while I was just the sister." Tobi felt a coldness spread from his chest to his fingertips. "Bisola, what are you talking about?" She laughed, a sound that lacked any mirth. "Who do you think told Fiona about your schedule? Who do you think told her exactly which buttons to push to make you look guilty? Fiona is a predator, yes, but she's a lazy one. She needed a map, and I gave it to her." Tobi's world tilted. The betrayal he had felt from his friends was a paper cut compared to this. His own blood had orchestrated his downfall. "Why?" Tobi whispered, the word barely audible over the lapping waves. Bisola turned to him, her eyes hard. "Because I needed you to fail. I needed Mommy and Papa to see that their investment was flawed. I wanted the scholarship money they were saving for your masters to go to me. But then," she paused, her lip curling, "I realized Fiona was going to actually destroy you. If you went to prison, there would be no money left at all. The lawyers would eat it. So I became your anonymous ally. I saved you so I could keep the family resources intact for myself." She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a bank slip, a transfer from their father's emergency savings to an account in her name, authorized while Tobi was in hiding. "I told them I needed it to bribe the police to keep you safe in the cell. They gave it to me without a second thought because they were so desperate to save their golden boy." Tobi looked at the paper, then at the girl he had protected since childhood. She had used his life as a chessboard, playing both the attack and the defense. He had his reputation back, but his family was a hollowed-out shell, and his sister was the one holding the drill. The air in the family living room in Ikorodu was stagnant, heavy with the smell of burning coils and the weight of unspoken truths. Mami was asleep in the chair, her face lined with the exhaustion of a woman who had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Tobi stood in the doorway, the bank slip Bisola had given him crumpled in his pocket like a piece of shrapnel. He looked at his sister, who was calmly scrolling through her phone, the glow of the screen illuminating a face he no longer recognized. She had played the world, Fiona, and her own blood, and she had won. "You're going to tell them, aren't you?" Bisola asked, not looking up. "You are the golden boy. You always do the right thing." Tobi didn't answer. He walked to the small table where his father's old radio sat, beside the framed photo of his matriculation day. He realized then that his goal,
to be believed, had been achieved. The university had cleared him. The neighborhood whispered his name with pity instead of hate. But the truth he had fought for was a lie within a lie. If he exposed Bisola, he would destroy his parents. If he kept quiet, he would be an accomplice to his own family's ruin.
Tobi took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the dean. Instead, he made a single post on the university's main forum. But it wasn't a victory lap. It was a formal withdrawal from the University of Lagos. He stated that the toxic environment of campus life had made it impossible for him to continue. He watched the comments flood in, shouts of "no" and "stay and fight," but he felt a strange, cold peace. He wasn't building a bridge for them anymore. He was burning the one that led back to his old life. He walked over to Bisola and placed the bank slip on her lap. "Keep the money," he whispered. Her eyes widened, the first crack in her icy composure. "I'm leaving, Bisola. I'm going to the north, to Ongo Yakubu's farm. I'm dropping out." The horror on her face was satisfying. She had wanted the money and the status of being the good child, but her plan relied on Tobi staying successful so she could parasite off his future. By walking away from everything, his degree, his career, his golden future, he was leaving her with nothing but a handful of stolen cash and a family she had broken beyond repair. As Tobi walked out of the compound with nothing but his duffel bag, he heard Mami wake up and call his name. He didn't stop. He had achieved his goal. The truth was out, and he was no longer a rapist in the eyes of the world. But the heartbreak was his final price. He had learned that love was a weapon and loyalty was a currency. He vanished into the Lagos night, a man who had cleared his name, only to realize it wasn't worth the breath it took to speak it. Behind him, the golden boy was dead, and the only thing left was the silence of a house built on sand.